Hello, welcome back to the channel. What about a wee bus tour today? Yes, today we're heading out on a bus tour as part of Doors Open Days 2025. The Inverclyde Tourist Group are providing a free bus tour around some parts of the Inverclyde area. We'll check out that shortly here on the video. The tour starts here at the Old West Kirk in Greenock on the Esplanade. Now, as I say, this tour is part of Doors Open Days 2025. Doors Open Days is Scotland's largest free festival that celebrates places and stories new and old. The festival takes place every September and you can explore hundreds of fascinating buildings across Scotland for free. Some open up once a year, some just once a lifetime. Now you can find out more information about Doors Open Days on their website, doorsopendays.org.uk. We'll include a link to their website on our description below this video. So that's doorsopendays.org.uk, and we'll also include a link to the Inverclyde Tourist Group in our video description below as well. So now we'll go into the Old West Kirk and have a look. Morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Old West Kirk. Now come with me on a journey back to the 1580s. Just 20 years previously, the Protestant Reformation had swept through Scotland. On the throne was King James VI, who imagined himself as head of the new Presbyterian Church, only to be bluntly told that Jesus was its king, in whose realm James was just a member. At that time, Greenock's Laird of Lord was John Shaw. His career was the proliferation of churches around the country for the new denomination. But ironically, he had no kirk in his own estate. Instead, he and his tenant families must trudge 4.5 miles over muddy tracks and wade across 2 streams to attend the church at Inverkirk every Sunday in all weathers, or be fined for absence. John, in addition, as a landowner, must pay a hefty tax towards upkeep of the Inverkirk kirk. So he determined to establish a kirk on his own land, but anticipated a backlash from Inverkirk Church due to the loss of his tax. So he did what was unthinkable to most Presbyterians then. He petitioned the king for permission to build his kirk. King James was delighted. He noted John's intention to build the kirk at his own cost, so exempted him from paying further tax to Inverkirk to help defray that expense. In a royal charter of 1589, the king decreed that the new building was to be called the Parish Kirk of Greenock, wording which soon paved the way for all John's lands to be incorporated as the Parish of Greenock. John's kirk opened for worship in 1591. The next year, it was retro-approved by an Act of Parliament in the same session in which another parliamentary act elevated the Presbyterian Church to become the official state church. So, John's kirk was the first recorded by the Church of Scotland. The first after the Reformation to be built on land which was not previously ecclesiastical, and the only one founded during that era by a royal charter, this confirmed by Parliament. The kirk was originally situated in what is now Greenock Bingo Hall's car park, and was very different from what you see nowadays. An oblong of crude masonry with unglazed windows, a thatched roof, and a beaten earthen floor. Around the inside walls were benches, but these reserved for males. Women could bring stools, or otherwise, this is the kind of stool And this is about the size of it, by the way. It was called a creepy stool because it was very low to the ground. So, the women must bring such stools, which they might get from birth and more or less have, so they could go around to any sedentary occupation, gossip, work or whatever. That was their stool, they carried it where they would. Either that, or they must sit on the bare ground, but if dozing off during the dreary sermons, they were poked awake by a church usher equipped with a long wooden wand for just such a purpose. Strict regulation of the congregation, and not just for religion, was maintained by a Kirk session, a body of elders, some of whom became officious busybodies. They rang the church bell at 8 o'clock each morning to get the menfolk out of bed for work, and they rang it at 9 o'clock each night to get the menfolk out of the taverns and back to bed. The bell was operated by a rope hanging down outside the building. This, the local urchins would, at random times, pull and run away. Such impudence infuriated the elders, but amused the other adults, fed up with the elders' interference in their lives, and who never betrayed the culprits. In 1699, the owners of a neighbouring estate, the Crawfordlairds of Cartsburn, joined the parish and became equally responsible with the Shaws for the kirk's upkeep. To accommodate the now extended congregation, the kirk was made cruciform by addition of 2 stubby wings. One was allocated to the Crawfordlairds and was called the Cartsburn aisle. The other, the Shaw aisle, was entered at its top from outside by a grand staircase, which you can see as you come in today. Nowadays, it's a favourite setting for wedding photographs. Incidentally, in weddings of yore herein, the ceremony could not proceed until the bridal couple, in presence of the congregation, could recite Word Perfect, the 10 Commandments, and the Lord's Prayer. Now, the Shaw and Crawfordlairds often disagreed about who paid for what repairs, so at a Sunday service they sat glowering at one another across the void in here. A small upper chamber within the Shaw aisle, up there, was reserved for the Shaw Laird and his family, where they might warm themselves at its cosy fire before venturing into the Sunday service in the draughty church here below. Presbyterians then must adhere to the biblical edict to keep Sunday holy. No one was to do secular work on that day. The text specifically referred to manservants and maidservants. Nevertheless, we can guess who prepared the fire in the antechamber for the laird and his family to enjoy. But then there's been one rule for them up the stairs and another one for us down here. If ordinary folk broke this edict, they would find themselves at the next church service sitting hunched on a low stool of repentance, humiliated in front of their neighbours and lambasted by the minister for their mortal sin. Several galleries or lofts were constructed, of which only 2 survive. One is the farmer's loft, which is at your back, and this was catered for the country folk from the interior of the parish. To identify it, a model of a plough is suspended above, and if you'll just turn your heads, you probably will be able to see that. Not to be outdone, the local masters of ships and seamen sought permission to build a loft for their own people. This was to be paid for from a fund called the Sailor's Box. In it, which is here, the front pew was reserved for captains and was covered by a blue cloth fastened by brass studs and furnished with cushions. The pew behind, for ship's mates, had the blue cloth, but was minus the studs and the cushions. The other rows for ordinary seamen had no covering at all. No females were permitted up there. Indeed, admission was restricted to members who had originally subscribed to its construction and who in addition must pay a fee upon each entry. This was controlled by a follically challenged old sea dog, just follically challenged like myself, Baldy Pin, who had a wooden leg and a blind eye. Now, if a stranger approached with the mistaken impression that he must pay only for the entrance fee to go up, Baldy would transfix him with his blind eye until he heard the money clunk into the sailor's box. Then switching to his good eye, he declared the fellow ineligible to proceed after all. Of course, no cash was ever refunded. Suspended over that gallery is a model of an 18th century British naval frigate, the fourth succession such emblem, all of the previous ones having in the interim disintegrated. Greenock's 19th century commerce primarily serviced the West Indies slavery-driven sugar industry. Docks, factories and refineries now surrounded the Kirk. The nouveau riche entrepreneurs, the Kirk's leading congregational members, therefore removed their gentrified families from the grime, noise and squalor of these workplaces to many estates in Greenock's then rural West End, where they soon wished to also have a posh church in the vicinity. To justify moving there, holes in this ancient kirk, and you can see one there in the roof. It's not a great picture, but you can still see the kind of holes that there were. Holes in the roof and the floor causing severe flooding were deliberately declared unrepairable. And in 1841 the congregation left for the fine new building, abandoning this wee kirk to moulder for the next 23 years. During that period, the workaday population of the original area vastly increased, with no active kirk in which to worship. Consequently, the old building was in only 9 months renovated, so much for being unrepairable. Its walls were now faced with polished ashlar, to which you'll see today. In 1864, it opened. In the 20th century, Harland and Wolff, Northern Ireland's giant shipbuilder, sought a footfall in mainland Great Britain. In 1916, it bought Caird's shipyard, which flanked the kirk. Now, if you will see the top picture here, you can see what Caird's shipyard was around it. Next, it leased an adjacent redundant harbour to create shipbuilding slipways. To complete its desired shipyard extent, by agreement with the Kirk's congregation, the company agreed to transfer the church building, stone by stone, to its present site, here at the corner of Greenock's Esplanade, and also to relocate those in the Kirk's graveyard. Prior to dismantling the kirk, Harland and Wolff built on this site the Pirrie Hall, named after its managing director, William Pirrie. This gifted to the congregation so that worship could continue uninterrupted during the transfer of the building. From 1920, the original graveyard was exhumed and the human remains transferred elsewhere. Some whose descendants requested it were reburied in the vicinity of their associated gravestones, sited around the kirk's precinct here. So there's probably some 500, or the dust of some 500 people if you read the gravestones and the names on them. Clearing the old graveyard was not without its critics, who ominously warned that no good would come of such desecration of consecrated ground. Anyway, From 1925 onwards, the kirk was delicately taken apart in its former site to enable precise reassembly as much as practical here, but with a new tower plus interior, although with the inside woodwork which you now see, plus all of the windows retained. And let me just point out your guide for your tour this morning's grandfather, Willie Pete, was one of the two main masons who achieved that purpose. By 1928, the kirk here was rededicated for worship and it thrived. Meantime, by contrast, by 1928, only 2 ships had been launched from Harland and Wolff's newly constructed slipways. And 1929 saw the world plunged into the Great Depression, a calamity which blighted commerce and employment throughout the world for a decade. Of course, this included Harland and Wolff's Greenock yard, which never produced another vessel. And Greenock's harbingers of doom proclaimed that, as they had foretold, desecration of consecrated ground had incurred divine retribution. So consequently, if anybody should ever ask you the cause of the 1930s worldwide Great Depression, you can now confidently tell them the reason why. It's all due to here. In more recent times, due to the shrinkage of church attendance generally and consequent amalgamation of kirks, in which the Old West Kirk became involved, it was decommissioned for worship in 2011. The site was sold by the Church of Scotland in 2022. Nowadays, in sympathetic private hands, it depends on funding for maintenance as a heritage icon, enhancing its beautiful setting in Greenock Esplanade and entrancing those who visit it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being a number of these visitors to us. Now, incidentally, when you go outside, please walk to the end of the stone staircase, and just around the corner you will see on the wall a shield containing 3 goblets. The family of John Shaw, who built this kirk, if you remember, he was to do with the religious aspect, also provided the hereditary wine tasters to the kings of Scots, who I feared that they were going to be poisoned. So if wine was poured, but not immediately drunk, into a goblet, the goblet would be capped, as shown in the picture, to prevent tampering. John, purely for its prestige value, used this coat of arms, wherein the goblet motif is shown in triplicate. Now, that's only really a fancy heraldic device. However, one visitor seeing this speculated that the first goblet must be for white wine, the second goblet would be for red wine. So what was the third one for? Alka-Seltzer, probably. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I've said, that is your whole tour of the Old West Kirk. But I can assure you that there is plenty more, and we invite you now just to have a few minutes to walk around before you go on to the next phase of your tour. And I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it stays dry for you.
So great to hear about all the history here at the Old West Kirk. That's what Doors Open Days is all about, learning about all the history and heritage about buildings we don't usually get to access or get to visit. So that's what Doors Open Days is all about. So great to hear that history from Inverclyde Tourist Group. So now we'll head out onto the bus, which is just over there, and take part in the bus tour.
I hope you enjoyed that. That was Andrew Pearson who gave that quite brief talk about the Old West. Andrew's one of the former members of the tourist group. The tourist group has been going now for 22 years. Today you're stuck with Marlon and I. Marlon is the secretary, currently the secretary, Marlon Carmichael and Betty Terrace. A couple of faces I know, people I know quite well. I've been about for a number of years.
Won't make a quiet woman.
Few more. And Aileen Esler was also here. She's a member of the tourist group. And Rona Stewart, who is here too. So there's almost as many of us. I know the right. Right, we're going to get started now, and we're going to. I'm going to do the talk here. We're hoping to. Well, Marlon's going to check.
We now arrive at our first stop on the tour. It's the Lyle Hill here in Greenock. And now we'll hear from Betty from the Inverclyde Tourist Group to tell us more about the Lyle Hill.
Lyle Hill was built by Abram Lyle of Lyle Sugar, and he made people men who come in from the Highlands and men who come in from Ireland a penny a day to build this hill to join the centre of Greenock to the southwest of the town. And it was seen as quite a big thing at the time. Abram Lyle was a very famous provost. So, Lyle Hill, here we are, the viewpoint. Just a wee second. Now, we're not getting off, we don't have time, but what we're saying to you today is, if you haven't really been up here for a while, come back. And can I just say to you that this is the second best view in Inverclyde. The best view in Inverclyde is Tower Hill. And if you haven't been there at all, and there's an amazing number of locals who haven't, or haven't been for a while, take yourself to Tower Hill and have a really good look round. The view is fantastic. Don't tell anybody. So, the passengers from the ships, which you know is one of our main functions, absolutely love it up here because you can see so much, you can tell them so much about the lochs and about the other side of the river, about Helensburgh, and maybe if they're still with us, we'll do that next year. And we're going to go on now, and we're going to just have a brief, if you can. Ainsley. I'll get that one wrong. Ainsley, we're going to just have a quick look at the Cross of Lorraine. When we take people in to tell them all about the Cross of Lorraine, we say to them, or we used to say this for a laugh, especially to the kids, now if you're coming in through these gates, you'll need your passport. You need to show us your passport, because the land on which the cross stands is French soil. It belongs to France, and most years someone from the French embassy comes and lays a wreath to celebrate Bastille Day.
So we've just been at the Lyle Hill in Greenock. Now on the bus tour we're visiting the Wemyss Bay Station. Now there's a lot of history here at the Wemyss Bay Station. It's a lovely station, so let's go in and have a look around. See the historic posters over there? You could travel to Paisley for 69 pence back then, look at that. So here we are, into Wemyss Bay Station. Look at that roof. Brilliant architecture, absolutely amazing. The plants over there are lovely. Looked after the Friends of Wemyss Bay Station, look at that, that's lovely. Great work by the Friends of Wemyss Bay Station. That's just based over here, the bookshop, and they've got a gallery as well.
So I'm Greg, I'm from the Friends of Wemyss Bay Station, group founded in 2009 to help care for the station, particularly bringing the flowers back. We'll talk about it in a while. But I'll tell you something about the history of the place and then show you some of the features of the station. So it's best to start here. This is a map that was being used for publicity purposes, we think from about the 1930s till the 1970s. And it appeared in poster form like this, on the stations, on the ships, in smaller formats, in timetables. This is not actually a genuine one.
No.
We acquired a real one which required a certain amount of conservation, and this is an exact photographic replica of it. But what this is really good at is illustrating why the railway was built to Wemyss Bay. We've got other big lots of Glasgow down here, and if you were going on a steamer, it was rather a long way around. I mean, if you think now, the Waverley takes, well over 2 hours to get to Rothsay, so it was all a bit slow. And unfortunately, in the Victorian era, it was not necessarily very pleasant either, because you were going along in a paddle steamer, churning up the water, and the water was full of industrial waste. I'm afraid it was also full of human waste in quite large quantities. So this was not a thing you really wanted to do. From the 1840s, you could catch the train down to Greenock and get the steamer from there, which made it a bit quicker. But as you know, the station was in Cathcart Street, so a bit of a walk down to Custom House Quay or whatever the boat was going to go from, and that involved walking along what was described as a noisome street, which meant you were likely to encounter the sorts of things you also found in the River Clyde at that time. So the railway to Wemyss Bay was built because this is about the closest suitable point to run a ferry across the Bute and of course to all sorts of other places. And it made Wemyss Bay a very unusual railway. It's not often realised that railways were built principally for goods. And in fact, by the late 19th century, most of the population lived within a horse and carts journey of a railway coal yard. But the puffers and Parahandy kept all the goods going down to Bute and the islands and the rest. So Wemyss Bay, very unusual, a passenger railway principally. And when the railway was opened, there was next to nothing at Wemyss Bay. There was Kelly House up on the hill, but otherwise it was just woodland. And Wemyss Bay and Skelmley, just to the south, they all developed and all these mansions and things got built because the railway came, you could get here. And so the railway opened in 1865, and the traffic grew. People living in Glasgow, surrounding industrial towns, were actually really fortunate. You had this amazing scenery, fresh air down on the Firth of Clyde, relatively close to hand, and you could now get there easily by train. And so, as the traffic grew, the station became more and more inadequate. It was a fairly grim place. It only had one platform to start with. There was no shelter at all on the pier. So it was decided the whole thing had to be rebuilt, and what we see now was completed in 1903. If you just go outside for a few moments, just watch out for the traffic, and you have a look at the outside of the station. Well, the architect for Wemyss Bay Station was James Miller. He was a well-known late Victorian Edwardian Scottish architect, and railway stations were one of his specialities. He came from a fairly humble background on a farm in Perthshire, but managed to qualify as an architect, and he was employed by the Caledonian Railway, but then he went on into private practice and built stations for most of the Scottish railway companies. But this is probably one of his finest, and he was working with the Caledonian's chief engineer and general manager Donald Matheson, and they were a busy pair because at about the time they were rebuilding Wemyss Bay Station, they were also extending Glasgow Central Station in a major way, so a fair bit to keep them occupied. But it's in no single recognisable architectural style. It's a remarkable mixture. Half timbering is not usually Scottish, looks like it might have escaped from Cheshire or something, but calf timbering was a characteristic of Miller. And you've also got, but you have got some of the other Scottish baronial stonework. You can see the date of the building, 1903, and stonework over there. The clock tower is Italianate, and you can't see it from here, but down at the end of the pier there are two towers that are Japanese in design. So a remarkable mixture, but it all fits together really well. And look at the weather vane up there. You can see the letters CR in it, and that's for Caledonian Railway, the owners of the railway at the time. And there were also a few houses built as matching design just there for the station master and some of the more senior staff. Most of the workers who, the ordinary workers at the station, lived in various cottages in Skelmley over there. So one of the main characteristics of the station is the curves. This huge semicircular concourse and other curves on it. And that was because Miller and Matheson believed that crowds would flow more freely on curves rather than having to negotiate corners, and they could see where they were going. Because the transport system at the time was highly competitive. There were competing railways running the trains, the competing companies running the steamers, and they wanted to get people to their destinations as quickly as possible. So getting people from the train to the steamer as very fast was really important. I mean, now some schedules showed only 5 minutes was allowed for this, and I'll show you one or two other features of the station that were particularly designed for coping with a large number of people. So if we just go down onto the pier, well, so here you can see the pier is really wide, and that was because there would be different queues for all sorts of places, wanted to make sure people were queuing for the right steamer. These days you can only go to Rothsea, but well into the 1970s there were still steamers from here to Millport, and I'm afraid I'm sufficiently old to remember arriving at Wemyss Bay on a steamer from Campbelltown. So so had to keep people segregated as to where they were going, and of course leave space for the people coming off. And if we come over here, so what we've got here is a really interesting feature as to how they manage this quick transfer to the steamer, with the Caledonian Railway doing what became common at airports, or in fact the standard process at airports much later. This track here has got a platform on both sides, and this was the one where the main expresses from Glasgow to connect with the steamer would arrive, and they would have the luggage vans at the front, and there would be an army of porters on the timber platform. They could get all the luggage out the train on the other side from the passengers. And then down here there used to be a ramp down onto the pier, quite separate from the passenger walkway. So the luggage was entirely separate. Well, if you were a third class passenger, you would be carrying your own luggage, but all the other luggage, it was kept quite apart from the passengers, so it didn't get in the way. Yeah, and you can see that there used to be 4 platforms, it's now down to 2. But one of the interesting features is that although the station could get very busy, that even after the Second World War, you still had long periods when not a lot happened. There'd be a big rush for the steamers departing about 9 o'clock-ish. There might be some others round about midday, early afternoon, particularly on Saturdays, and then there'd be people coming back late afternoon. And that was one of the reasons why the floral displays developed at Wemyss Bay. A lot of people were needed when the steamers and the trains were in, but some of them at least didn't have that much to do at other times, and the first station master after the station was rebuilt was a keen gardener who realised he had a big greenhouse on his hands. And the Friends of Wemyss Bay Station look after the flowers now, but if you look around the concourse you can see lots of little shelves at high level. Now ScotRail requires us to keep our feet on the ground at all times for safety reasons, but there used to be a potted plant on each of those shelves, and the place certainly rivaled the Botanic Gardens. It was incredible. And I'll just show you one or two things.
When it was steam, and it's obviously changed to electric now, was it open like that?
Yes, it always was. Yes, let the steam out. If you come round here, and you can perhaps just see here. You can see here how they rebuilt the station. They had to keep the trains running while they rebuilt it, just like Network Rail does now. But they also needed more space. So what they did was they built a new sea wall out into the Firth, where you're standing now. 140 years ago, you'd have been in the sea. And they then built half the new station on the land they'd reclaimed, diverted the trains into the half the station they'd built, then they could knock down the old station and build the other half of the new station. And this photograph here shows the top of a wall here, basically going through the middle of the concourse, and we think that is the top of the original sea wall. And then, but car ferries and the rest, they didn't come till after the Second World War. Car ferries started from Wemyss Bay in 1954. They'd had them to the Isle of Wight since 1926, but it was very difficult organising car ferries and how the piers would be modified when all the piers around the Clyde were all in different ownerships. And some of you may remember that when car ferries did start here in 1977, it was all a bit of a bodge, because you went on a ramp, in the side of the ship off the old pier. There was the turntable, the lift to take the cars down into the hold. So the ship could spend as long berthed getting the cars on and off as it was underway. So and then the pier was considerably cut back in the late 1980s, so it's just now the single link span, which and that's all there is now, contrasting with when you could get 7 steamers round the pier. I mean, obviously the main roof here is one of the principal features of the station. It causes quite an interesting maintenance problem in that the seabirds use the roof for breaking open shells on shellfish so they can eat what's inside. So there's a big gutter all the way around here, and that keeps getting filled up with debris from seashells, particularly with some of the heavy rain we've been getting. It's been pretty important to keep it cleared out, otherwise it'll overflow. But it's as you can see, a remarkable station, and we're very pleased to have it here.
I appreciate it, Greg. Thank you so much for giving your time, and apologise for not getting the email. I'm Marilyn.
Okay.
Emailed you. Thank you so much.
It was great to see Wemyss Bay Station. Now we're visiting Gourock.
Can everybody hear me? You don't need to see me, but can you see me? My name's Bob Webster, and I've been here for donkeys with the Inverclyde Tourist Group. Not that many years, 23, something like that. Anyway, I've done this particular trip quite often, and I don't usually need notes, but I thought it's such a long while since I've done it. Where's my notes? But my notes are still in the many boxes I've got since I flitted last week. So my apologies, I'm not winging it, but anyway, we'll talk about it. Anyway, it's an interesting place. I'm sure you've found it's a gold mine of history and heritage. We're so fortunate to have that right on our doorstep, and it's good that there are people interested in maintaining it, including us. We're really keen on maintaining it. Anyway, so I'm Bob. If there are any questions, give me a shout. I've got 15 minutes. Who's got a watch?
I'll be winding you up,
Winding me up.
Don't talk too much.
Right, I'm going to talk about this map. which I remember as a boy, came out in the early 1950s. It was done by British Rail. Now, if you gather round, it's important. This one, there we are. There, you see, we're in big letters, Gourock. You know, whereas Greenock, some of the tiny letters. So, and it's telling passengers where the main steamer points are. And Gourock was a major steamer point. The Craigiestown, Wemyss Bay, or Dawson, was that Arn? Aye, Arn, Millport somewhere, Millport and so on. There was, when the railways went daft the late Victorian time, and they built all sorts of railways. Some of them economically were kind of suicidal, but a lot of them made money. Now, in the Firth of Clyde coast, there was a lot of railways expanding, and the biggest company was the Caledonian Railway Company, who built this railway station. And they were wealthy, as railway companies go, and they were very distinctive colour. The locomotives were blue, sort of sky blue, and the coaches were 6-wheel coaches, which meant they're more comfortable. And the express services took exactly as they take now, 40 minutes from here to Glasgow Centre. So we've at least maintained it, you know. And the 40 minutes is because they've dropped a lot of the stations, Hillington East, Hillington West, all these sort of stuff. And that's been a big bonus to us. So Gourock attracted all sorts of people, holiday makers, but more importantly, it attracted residents. And these wonderful, substantial villas that you see in not just Gourock, but in Largs and Dunoon in particular. Dunoon is loaded and Rossi, all these beautiful houses. And you could get cheap mortgages if you bought a season ticket for the railway. That's part of the incentive. Oh, I should have asked. Everybody come from Inverclyde? Oh, it's all right then. Anyway, so that's us, and we're here. And Gourock was handily placed everywhere. Now, the Caledonian Railway Company, as I said, were the biggest railway company by a mile in Scotland. They trains only went to Greenock. Greenock, what is now Greenock Central. No, I think it was Greenock Central then. Greenock Central. If you know Greenock, the station was the street level of Cathcart Street. When you know there's a car park there, roughly there was a car park. Don't think you have to pay for the car park, there are no cars, but that was where the railway station was originally. And everybody else, other competitors, the Glasgow and South Western Railway, they operated from Greenock Princess Pier. Now, the architect there was James Miller. You may have heard his name before at Wemyss Bay. It's a masterpiece. This is not, I don't think James Miller would say this is one of his masterpieces, but nevertheless, it's a functional building, but there's some splendid, down the central station extension, and the most beautiful one, I think, anyway, is Stirling. He done it. And he done Fort Matilda. When they were extending the railway, they had to build the tunnel, which is the longest tunnel in Scotland, between Greenock West and, there were a couple of short tunnels before that, Greenock West and Fort Matilda. What was that? Aye, so he designed Fort Matilda station. If you notice, actually, if you travel on the train today, even, if you go to Glasgow, you come to Carstite, a very functional, basic station. Whereas you go to Fort Matilda, it had all the facilities, you know, waiting rooms for ladies, waiting rooms for men, you know, and they're still there, and it is used as a community model railway club are there. What's that mean? Time. Anyway, so that's a picture, and it's all fueled by the Comet. It went built in Port Glasgow, I'm sure you all know that, and it fueled it all, and there were steamers going down the fair, the water for the fair was a very popular holiday resort, and you can see the cows are moving, so let's move on anyway. This display was done by a guy called, what's his name now? Alistair Alexander, who was a journalist, and he was a sports commentator on the Radio Scotland. He commentated the football matches, and a writer. And He's written quite a useful book full of illustrated. So this is his story. And these are the ships waiting in a convoy. They're forming a convoy. Now, I've had time to worry about, we know every ship that was in that and whether it survived or not. It went via South Africa for some reason, or it could be a conflict in the Middle East. It went via South Africa, so it was a long way. It was going to the Far East. And it lost quite a few. And you just see a little bit of what is known then as RAF Greenock, which is a battery park. And that was for the seaplanes. And the ramps are still there. If you go to the battery park, you'll see the ramps. That was for the seaplanes, and that was the hangars for them. There's the Queen Mary, not Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth. She's brand new. She sailed from New York to get fitted out. So she's just bare, nothing in her. And she sailed herself without any other ship guarding her, which is a real risk business because you can really miss her with a torpedo. So that was her passing. That's Tower Hill. This Gourock Station there. And James Miller was the architect. And really he was concentrating and moving people. And he done something at this station that he's done certainly in Glasgow Central Station. And now Wemyss Bay, the platforms are at a slight angle, so they're in favour of the passengers leaving the trains, right, not joining the train. And you don't notice it, it's indiscernible, but they had to make sure they went fast. It was make sure they get on the boat, because there's only 2 minutes to get on the boat from here. The boat was tied up, and there were 5 berths they used. They only use 1 berth now, but 5 berths they use for the steamers. So that's the Queen Mary Pass. That's the steamer. That's Gourock. I think it's not a 1941 picture at all. It's an early 1950. This is the car park here in the Bay Hotel, which is quite famous or infamous, whatever way your point of view is. Certainly people talk about it still. And we get the occasional cruise ship passenger who knows about it because his mommy went there, or she met her dad. And the Continental Cafe is usually a very popular place for cruise passengers. They know about that. I don't know why they know about it, but so that's it. So Gourock's not changed a lot, except they've improved or not the front. But outside here, that's a Bay Hotel there. Outside here, where the car park is, it was the sidings for the coaches. You can see them there. And the initial plan was to build 2 supermarkets. I think small supermarkets, 2 supermarkets and housing. And I haven't built anything. I'm pleased I haven't built anything. It's nice to have the open space, I think. That's my personal view. Anyway, so this was a centre for Navy ships in the Second World War. This is very important. This is the boom defence. And that's from the Clough Lighthouse all the way to Dunoon. So it's basically a big net down in the Clyde, so nothing could get past. And submarines would tangle the net. The net is made of metal. So that was there in the First World War as well. And if you go down to the clock, if you're interested, you can see what's left of the remnants that's left of it. So that's a boom, which is very important. That kept all the foreign ships out and the Allied ships in safe. All the ferries, the steamers only went as far as Gourock to Dunoon. They didn't go any further. They had to go to Wemyss Bay to get a steamer that went beyond there. So you can see the British troops embarking at Gourock for the Norwegian campaign. And that's General Mountbatten. Was he a general? I'm not sure. But they had a lot of noble visits here during the war. Let me see. This is U-31. It's U-33, but U-31 was correction. They're right, I'm wrong. U-33 was identified as beside this boom, and locally people thought it had breached the boom, you know, and that would be chaotic. And all these ships were anchored, so you can imagine the mayhem that could cause. They didn't. The submarine was here in Clyde. There were one or two here in Clyde at that time, but they were laying mines. They weren't really looking for any. Anyway, fortunately they got caught. So.
We move on to the murals a wee bit.
No, not really. This is much more interesting. But I didn't even know the murals were there till Wednesday. Nobody told me about it. And they used it to get the troops from the Straits and Canada. They used 3 ships: the Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, the Aquitania. Basically, these 3 ships, because they were very, very fast and the great volume. The Queen Mary, I think, could take 13,000 troops. They thought they were going to be travelling in luxury, you know. Queen Mary, we're on a Queen Mary, but again, it wasn't quite luxury, you know, all these guys stuck in it. And it must have been terrible actually for them. So they came here, and when the war was finished, the same ships took them back again. So they come here, got on the train here and at Princess Pier, and they went to the south of England, mostly east and south of England, to join the war there.
Thank you to Bob Webster for the talk here at Gourock Train Station. Now we're looking at the new wall panels here at the station. It's a 105 metre long mural showcasing the best of Inverclyde. Inverclyde Council worked with various partners and members of the public to bring the vision for the mural to life and brighten up the station wall. You can find out more information about the mural on the Inverclyde Council website, inverclyde.gov.uk, and there's also information on the Discover Inverclyde website, discoverinverclyde.com. So that's us now back here at the West Kirk just over there, and behind me here is the Perry Hall. It was a great bus trip. Thank you to Inverclyde Tourist Group for the tour as part of Doors Open Days 2025 here in Inverclyde. Thank you very much for joining us on this video. If you'd like to see more of our upcoming videos, please do subscribe to our channel, and thank you to all our subscribers for subscribing. So you can subscribe to our channel, and you can also like this video to see more in the future. Thank you very much for joining us on the Doors Open Days 2025 bus trip by the Inverclyde Tourist Group. We'll include all the links to the organisations below in our description below.